This week's 1044 is brought to you by Chevron Delo 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash.
While almost all fleets recognize safety as a priority, it's not always the top priority.
You're watching CCJ's 1044, a weekly webisode that brings you the latest trucking industry news and updates from the editors of CCJ. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you'll never miss an installment of 1044. Hey everybody, welcome back. As always, I am still Jason Cannon, and right through there, as always, is Matt Cole. A report released earlier this year by trucking tech firm Motus found that while safety is a priority for fleets, it's not the priority in a lot of cases. In Motus' State of Safety report, 95% of responding fleet managers said that driver safety performance was a priority. But when asked to rank priorities, they ranked increasing revenue and minimizing expenses ahead of improving safety.
There are ways for fleets to prioritize safety while also boosting revenue and minimizing expenses, however. Jon Bernstein, VP of Product Management for mobile workforce tech firm Motus, explains that while the company's primary work is with mileage tracking for fleets of cars and vans, the company's safety offerings are applicable across driving industries.
Motus is a company that helps organizations with their, mobile workforce, operate and perform as most efficiently as possible. Our core business is really around vehicle reimbursement. So basically the ability for individuals or employees of those organizations that drive considerable, business miles a year, let's say more than 5,000, based on IRS regulations, a way in which that they can properly and efficiently reimburse those employees for the personal use of their vehicles. So in the Class 7 and Class 8 vehicle space, we obviously those are, commercial size vehicles. So for the most part, our direct work in terms of like what I just described is more for, less than Class 7, Class 8 vehicle types. And again, driving personal vehicles, or assets for, those types of driver communities. But certainly as you look at, mixed fleets and fleets just in general that have, various kind of driving populations and way in which they kind of deploy their employees and, the assets in which they drive, whether they be personal or business owned, we can blend, particularly in the topic we'll talk about today, our safety offering to really kind of go across all of their driver, bases and classifications in terms of the offerings we can provide.
Now, while Jon says that there's a lot of obvious direct costs associated with crashes, there's also indirect costs that could be avoided with a proper safety program in place. We'll hear exactly what those are after a word from 1044 sponsor Chevron Lubricants. Protecting your diesel engine and its after-treatment system has traditionally been a double-edged sword. The same engine oil that is so essential to protecting your engine's internal parts is also responsible for 90% of the ash that is clogging up your DPF and upping your fuel and maintenance costs. Outdated industry thinking still sees a trade-off between engine and emission system protection, and Chevron was tired of it. So they spent a decade of R&D developing a no-compromise formulation. Chevron Lubricants developed a new ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by a whopping 60%, which reduces the rate of DPF clogging and extends DPF service life by 2.5 times. And just think what you can do with all the MPGs you're going to add from cutting your number of regens. But Delo 600 ADF isn't just about aftertreatment. It provides complete protection, extending drain intervals by preventing oil breakdown. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your aftertreatment system, and now you don't. 600 ADF from Delo with OmniMax technology, it's time to kick some ash.
First and foremost, I think the direct and indirect costs to employers for motor vehicle kind of crashes are wide ranging and substantial. The direct costs are all around like worker comp benefits, healthcare costs, increase in medical insurance premiums. The list kind of goes on and on. The things that you directly are being, charged for and you can kind of see. But, you think about some of those indirect costs as well, supervisor time in terms of rescheduling or special arrangements, the time to coordinate vehicle repair, replacement, reassignment of, personnel to cover for missing employees, right? It all kind of blends together, in such a way where employers are really paying for the crashes that both happen, on and off the job, and implementing a comprehensive safety program is really a a profitable investment from a time and resource perspective. The other thing that I'd add is, the sheer dollars. I mean, I think the last study that I had seen from, the National Highway Transportation Safety Board is it's, over $70 billion in terms of the cost to employers. And it's interesting because, you got to remember that even an off the job, crash, right? That again has implications like we were just describing in terms of the direct and indirect costs that, affects kind of the employer. So, really kind of making sure that organizations are thinking holistically and what it means to them is I think, incredibly important.
Everybody in the trucking industry wants to be safe and have safe drivers in trucks. Sometimes, though, as long as things are going well for a fleet, safety gets put on the back burner until something happens.
Miles are dollars, right? And obviously with hours of service and other regulations, it's obviously kind of top of mind. I think safety in general is one of those things where until you kind of get hit with it, it's almost like a set it and forget it or think about it. And then like it goes kind of to the back of your brain. But when you start to kind of pile on again, some of the statistics that we were just kind of describing and talking about, obviously they become extremely material in terms of just, the potential cost avoidance that, putting a safety program in place would obviously afford organizations. So I think it's really, until it hits the organization, it just becomes kind of like a set it and forget it or think about it, but, don't put it to the top of the list type of scenario. Again, getting from point A to point B, delivering on service commitments, those are the things that are revenue drivers. These are really kind of cost avoidance measures. And so until there's a lawsuit or something like that, it tends to kind of be more of a, let me do what's minimally required of us in order to, make sure that we're, I hate to say it, but checking the box. But I think with, a comprehensive kind of training program, the opportunity from a cost avoidance perspective is obviously extremely significant.
Money spent on safety does provide a positive return on investment, Jon says, but that return tends to go unnoticed.
Just a quick statistic. I mean, so on average, what we've seen is for every dollar spent on safety, kind of the return is, anywhere from, $3 to, call it $5, whether it be personally owned vehicles or fleet vehicles. So there's material return, but it's, again, it kind of goes sometimes in that visible versus invisible kind of scenario, because until it really happens, it's hard to, ultimately quantify, as opposed to, I made one more delivery today, or I was able to go see one more client, and I was able to sell this deal. And you see obviously the impact of what that, has provided from a, top line perspective.
Jon says it's never been easier to get training programs in front of drivers with online programs that can be sent to phones or other in-cab devices.
Our training product is web-based, right? And, nowadays, all of these are web-based offerings. The simplicity of kind of, deploying kind of training modules are, all can be done kind of, directly, on a mobile device, in an in-cab device, if it was a Class 8 or Class 8 over-the-road kind of trucking vehicle. Obviously, simple things like doing not only annual MVR or motor vehicle record checks, but having, continuous kind of monitoring of those records, I think are critically important. I think it's all about kind of getting ahead of the game and being kind of visible and focused on the puts and takes that can really drive, potential either bad driving behavior or, bad outcomes to the driver and then therefore the employer, are critical. So again, it's really around motor vehicle record checks, monitoring and verifying insurance coverage levels, putting training programs in place that, don't have to necessarily be classroom oriented like they may have been in the past, but rather being web-based. They could be short 2 or 3 minute, snippets that before starting out on your first appointment, load it up, review it. I think the reinforcement piece of like riding a bike, the more you do it, the more it becomes ingrained, is kind of key and critical for these organizations.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on the latest in trucking industry news and trends. If you have any questions or feedback, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can catch us again next week.